Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I've been a snowplow operator for 18 years. Midwest winters don't faze me. I've cleared whiteouts on US 2 so thick you couldn't see the hood of the truck. I've de-iced bridges outside Duluth with nothing but coffee and elbow grease keeping me going. But nothing, not the blizzard, not the polar vortex of 19, not even that freak lake effect storm near Marquette last year, prepared me for what came that week. My name's Greg Toller, 42 years old, divorced, no kids, born and raised in a little town called Iron River, Michigan, just shy of the Wisconsin border. I operate out of the Michigan Department of Transportation Maintenance Garage in Escanaba. It's about as remote as you can get and still call it a job. The first signs were subtle. The ground froze solid in late September. I'm not talking about a little frost. I'm talking about 3 inches of permafrost in less than 2 nights. Trees started dying fast. Water mains cracked open like they'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Lake Michigan had chunks of ice floating in it before October even started. I was out on I-94 when it really began. MDOT had me assisting in the Upper Peninsula with ice patrol. Even though I usually worked local roads, the freeze got so bad they pulled drivers from every district. I'd been doing 12-hour shifts for 3 days straight, running the salt truck down to Menominee and back, clearing I-41 and M35. That morning, the sun never rose. I mean it, it just didn't show. It was like the entire sky had been blacked out by a curtain of frozen mist. I had my amber beacons on, wipers scraping constantly, and I still could barely see 20 feet ahead. The snow wasn't falling. It was drifting sideways, in slow spirals like ash from a forest fire. The thermometer in the truck read -37 degrees Fahrenheit. That's without wind chill. Just outside of Daggett, my radio chirped, "Plow 42, come in." It was Matt Kruger, our dispatcher, old school guy. Used to be in the Coast Guard before he joined MDOT. Voice like sandpaper and always chewing sunflower seeds. "Go ahead," I said, eyes still fixed on the road. "You're coming up on something weird. State police say there's a pile-up near the 577 junction, semis, at least 6 of them. Don't approach until emergency services get there." "Roger that." I slowed down, headlights carving through the ice fog. About a mile later, I saw the wreckage. Semi-trailers jackknifed across the asphalt like broken matchsticks. One was sideways, its rear doors blown open, spilling crates of frozen produce onto the snow-packed shoulder. Another was still running, engine rattling against the cold, no sign of drivers. I set the brake and got out. The silence was brutal. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. No birds, no wind, just the faint hum of my engine and the crunch of snow under my boots. I circled the first truck, looking for anyone. The cab door was open, a bloody handprint stained the inside of the window. I called it in. "Kruger, this is 42. I've got no drivers in sight, multiple semis. Something's not right here. One trailer's open, food shipment, some of it's missing." Silence on the line. Then static. 42, say again. "You're breaking up." I repeated myself, but the static got worse. That's when I heard the first noise. It was a thump, dull and heavy, like someone hitting the side of a shipping container. It came from inside the trailer nearest me. I approached, hand on the handle of the side hatch. Before I could pull it open, something slammed against it from the inside hard enough to bend the metal. I jumped back. Another slam. Then a moan. Low, guttural, half human. And that's when I saw her. A woman, barefoot, in a ripped parka, came stumbling out of the woods by the ditch. Her skin was grey, eyes sunken, lips cracked and bleeding. She didn't say a word, just charged at me like a wild animal. I didn't think, just reacted. Grabbed the snow shovel off my plow rack and swung, hit her square in the shoulder and knocked her down. But she didn't stay down. She scrambled like a spider, limbs bending wrong. mouth opening too wide. I got back in the cab and locked the door, hands shaking as she pounded on the side mirror. Then she stopped, turned, and bolted toward the overturned produce crates. I watched as she dug into a box of raw carrots and started biting through the plastic, not even chewing. I've seen hunger. I've driven through reservations during lean years. But this wasn't that. This was something else. Something primal. Something wrong. Kruger came back on the line, voice distorted. 4-2, get out of there. Pull back to the Menominee garage. Now, no detours. Don't stop for anything. Copy that, I muttered, already shifting into reverse. As I pulled away, I caught movement in my side mirror. At least 5 more figures emerging from the tree line. Thin, pale, shivering, all moving toward the wrecked semis. It took me 3 hours to reach Menominee. Normally it's a 45-minute drive, but the roads were useless, ice-packed, buried in snow, barely visible. My plow could only do so much when it was falling faster than I could clear. The garage was locked down. Kruger met me at the gate with a shotgun slung over his shoulder, not standard MDOT gear. He opened the passenger door and climbed in. You saw them too, didn't you? I nodded. They're not sick. They're not human anymore, he said quietly. We've had 5 incidents across the county. Troopers are gone. No comms with Green Bay or Marinette. Phones are dead. Cell towers are freezing. You got family? I shook my head. You're lucky. That night, we fortified the garage. There were 6 of us left. Kruger, me, and 4 other plow operators. Jamie, young guy from Iron Mountain. Rick, former diesel mechanic turned driver. Lisa worked the Salt Dome logistics. And Hector, ex-army, new hire from Lansing. We blocked the roll-up doors with sandbags and brine tanks, set up propane heaters, and rationed out our food stores, mostly vending machine snacks, coffee grounds, and a few crates of MREs that Hector had stashed just in case. That little stash saved us. The power was out, and the diesel generator only worked in short bursts. We had to rotate it between charging radios, warming engine blocks, and running a few strip lights inside the brake room. No heat, no comms, and temperatures that could kill you in minutes. The only thing standing between us and the frozen dark was an old Snowplow garage, a stack of salt bags, and the 6 of us pretending we weren't already in over our heads. On the morning of the 4th day, Lisa was the first to notice something wrong. She was at the back bay door, checking the outside temperature with handheld IR thermometer when she saw prints in the snow. Bare feet. Multiple sets. No shoes, no tread, just deep, red-tinged impressions in the ice behind the diesel tanks. They led around the side of the garage toward the supply fence. We all followed her out with rifles and flashlights, Kruger's shotgun, Hector's AR-15, and my old hunting rifle I'd kept under the bench seat of my plow truck since deer season. It was silent outside, but the air felt wrong. Too dense, like the cold had weight to it. Jamie moved around the corner first, his breath a heavy plume. Over here, he said. We stepped into view, one by one. The gate was open, not broken, not cut, unlocked. The chain was hanging loose, padlocks still attached. A trail of melted snow led beyond the fence into the woods behind the salt dome. I crouched down and touched the print. Still warm. The ice hadn't refrozen. That meant someone, or something, had been there less than 10 minutes earlier. We all looked at each other, but no one said it. We didn't need to. Something had figured out how to get close to us, and it wasn't acting like a wild animal. It was thinking, planning, observing. We got back inside fast and reinforced the fence line with anything we could find. Pallet racks, old steel drums, even the snow chains from our spare rigs. Kruger climbed onto the roof with binoculars while Rick and I rerouted the emergency fuel line from the main diesel tank to a smaller portable generator we'd mounted inside the workshop. If we lost fuel access, we'd be done. With temps hovering at minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit and wind gusts topping 40 miles per hour, exposure would take less than 3 minutes. Frostbite in 30 seconds. No exaggeration. That afternoon, The wind died down for the first time in days. It wasn't a comforting silence. It was worse. The wind had masked movement. Without it, we could hear everything. And that's when we first heard the scratching. Not loud, not frantic, just the soft sound of something or someone dragging their nails across the metal siding of the garage. It started near the eastern wall, low to the ground, and slowly moved around the perimeter. No footsteps, no growling, just the scratching. Hector took up position at the front bay window with the AR, while Kruger covered the back loading dock. I moved to the office, where the security monitor was still feeding a low-resolution image from the exterior cams. Most of them had been knocked out by frost or snowdrift, but one, Cam 3, facing the perimeter fence near the woods, was still working. The feed flickered, blurred by ice crystals on the lens, but through the haze, I saw them. 3 figures, standing still, facing the garage. They weren't moving, weren't speaking, just standing there in the snow, not shivering, not flinching. They looked human, but the cold should have dropped them dead hours ago. No one survives that long in bare skin without even a jacket. I zoomed in. Their eyes were open, staring at the camera. I backed away and called for Kruger. He stared at the monitor for a long time without blinking. Then he calmly walked to the wall, pulled down the emergency evacuation binder, and tore out the page marked pandemic protocols. It wasn't the standard stuff. This wasn't some bureaucratic flu drill. This sheet had handwritten notes, dates scratched in red ink, and instructions not printed on any official form. One line was circled twice. If exposed individuals display non-verbal aggression, avoid containment, evacuate and destroy all material left behind. Kruger folded the page into his coat pocket and told us the truth. Turns out MDOT had been warned. Not about zombies, not officially, but about neurological outbreaks in the north that started appearing as early as July. Rangers up near Copper Harbor reported missing hikers, strange animal behavior, and what they called freezing incidents. People were found flash frozen upright, mid-step. No clear cause of death. He said a team from Michigan Tech and the CDC came through in late August and never left. Their trucks were found abandoned on a logging road near Ontonagon, the doors wide open, no footprints in the snow. Kruger had seen the reports, heard the chatter on state radios, but no one believed it until the first freezer units started showing up on local roads. We were still processing all that when the attack came. It started with the plow alarms. One of the old International 7600S in the yard started honking. Not a long blast, just a quick chirp, like someone tapped the horn. Then another, from the Ford F550 next to it. Then all the dome lights in the trucks came on at once, flickering. The batteries had been disconnected the night before. It wasn't possible. Rick went to check the breaker panel, thinking maybe the diesel generator had surged a feedback loop. But before he could get there, the back bay door buckled. Not crashed, in-buckled, like something was pressing on it slowly, methodically, with inhuman strength. We raised our weapons and backed into a defensive formation. Hector took center, Kruger to his left, me and Lisa on the flanks. Jamie was in the office yelling into the emergency SAT phone trying to reach Lansing or anything east of Marquette. The door gave way with a horrible metal shriek. Cold air exploded into the workshop. Snow blasted in like a cannon, and through it, figures, not sprinting, not leaping, just walking deliberately, not slow, not fast, just steady. Their skin was grey-blue, covered in frost, eyes black, faces frozen in an expression that was almost blank. Like their humanity had been stripped away, but the muscle memory remained. One of them, the woman I'd seen near the semis, locked eyes with me. Her mouth opened slightly, but she didn't scream. She didn't have to. Every part of her body screamed wrongness. We opened fire. Controlled bursts, center mass, headshots. They didn't fall like people. They just stopped collapsed like bags of wet ice. But more came in. 4, then 8, then 15. Crawling over the broken brine tank, slipping between the sandbags. Lisa went down first, bit in the leg. Kruger shot the thing on top of her, but it was too late. Her leg had already turned purple in less than a minute. Frostbite doesn't work like that. This was something else. Like the bite carried the cold with it, spreading from the inside out. We had no choice. We fell back into the storage room, barricaded the door with salt crates. Jamie joined us, pale and shaking. The SAT phone had gone dead mid-call. Hector handed out spare mags while I wrapped Lisa's leg in thermal foil, but we both knew it was bad. She was losing sensation fast. That night, we waited. Outside, we heard them again, not growling, not howling, breathing, slow, ragged, fogging against the glass. And then, nothing. They were gone. By morning, Lisa was unconscious. Her pulse was weak, breath shallow. We couldn't risk staying. Kruger called it evacuation. We'd fuel up the remaining plows, load supplies, and head east toward Green Bay. If any place still had power, still had order, it'd be there. We loaded what we could into 2 rigs. The newer International HV 507, still warm from emergency idling, would be our lead. I took that one, partly because I knew its systems well, and partly because it still had functional infrared exterior cameras. An upgrade that, until now, had mostly been used for spotting deer on rural night runs. The second vehicle, an older Western Star 4700 with a box sander and plow blade, was taken by Hector. Jamie and Kruger rode with him. Lisa, now swaddled in layers of wool blankets and silver thermal wraps, was laid across the rear bench seat in my cab. Her condition unchanged, except for the darkening of her fingertips and the shallow wheezing that made me wonder if it was really frostbite or something worse. We rolled out just before 10 a.m. The sun hadn't risen again, not truly, but the sky had lightened enough to navigate without relying entirely on external LEDs. The landscape was unrecognizable. Everything was sheathed in blue-grey ice. Trees snapped from the weight of rime, roads crusted in a mix of salt and fresh snow, and houses stood dark and brittle like hollowed shells. Every now and then, we'd pass a vehicle buried under snowdrift, or worse, spun out on the shoulder with the doors flung open. No tracks, no footprints, no bodies. Our plan was to take US 41 south through Menominee and cross into Wisconsin, then cut east via Highway 64 toward Marinette, before linking with the southern bypass into Green Bay. A straight shot on paper, but nothing was straight anymore. Snowdrifts blocked intersections. Trees lay across the shoulders, their trunks splintered. On several occasions, we had to stop and use the plows like battering rams, clearing our path in brutal 10-foot bursts. Somewhere near Wallace, we picked up a strange signal. My truck's CB crackled with static and then bled into a faint, repetitive message. It sounded automated, looping every 30 seconds. Shelter available, Bay Park Square, generator intact, signal beacon, repeat, Bay Park Square Mall. Do not engage the afflicted. We hadn't heard a real broadcast in 2 days. Hector's voice came through on the convoy frequency, flat and wary. He didn't trust it, thought it might be bait, but Kruger insisted we log the coordinates. If nothing else, it was proof we weren't alone. As we crossed the state line, the snow started again, not flakes, but sheets, like white curtains dropped from the clouds. Visibility shrank to maybe 20 feet. The wipers squealed across frozen glass, and my defroster barely kept pace with the ice crawling along the edges. I shifted into low gear, pushing through drifts up to the grill, fingers tight on the wheel. Behind me, Lisa murmured something under her breath, her voice barely more than a whisper. I glanced back, but her eyes were still closed, her breath steaming shallowly in the cab. Traffic signs disappeared under the frost. At one point, I had to rely entirely on GPS coordinates, though even those were lagging, satellites struggling with the extreme atmospheric interference. At 11:42 a.m., we encountered our first direct threat. It was near the outskirts of Peshtigo, where a cluster of vehicles blocked the intersection. A frozen bus sat in the middle of the road, surrounded by 4 or 5 abandoned cars. We slowed, cautious. Something didn't feel right. I killed the high beams and used the infrared. Through the monochrome image, I saw movement. Several forms, humanoid, shuffling behind the bus. I blinked hard, unsure if the equipment was malfunctioning, but no, they were there. 8 figures, pale heat signatures, not warm like a living body, but faintly pulsing, like ice that still radiated energy. I shifted to intercom. Blockage ahead, heat signatures, stay sharp. Hector acknowledged. We watched as the things emerged, slowly, circling the front of the bus. Their clothing was shredded, eyes hollow. One of them had a firefighter's coat, still marked Marinette Fire Rescue, the helmet hanging from its neck by a broken chin strap. I put the truck in gear and edged forward. If they moved, I'd ram them. At this point, I had no illusion that they could be reasoned with or avoided. We had 2 missions: reach the shelter and keep Lisa alive. Everything else was background noise. One of the figures raised its arms as we approached, as if testing the truck's presence. It didn't flinch at the sound of the engine or the rumble of the plow cutting through ice. I hit the throttle. The impact jolted the cabin as it clipped the edge of the bus and 2 of the figures directly in front. They flew sideways into the snowbank and didn't move. The others scattered, uncoordinated, like moths in a cold wind. Jamie radioed in. They were following, maybe 5 of them, stumbling behind the rear truck like they were chasing the warmth. We kept moving. As we reached the southern edge of Marinette, the snow finally let up. For a moment, we saw the lake again, now fully frozen, dotted with what looked like fishing shacks, though no one in their right mind would be out here now. The sky had taken on an eerie blue hue, like sunlight trapped behind sheets of frozen glass. In that light, everything felt surreal, like we were driving through the remnants of a dream someone else had forgotten. Lisa's condition worsened. Her breathing had turned ragged. Each inhale a wheeze like air forcing through slush. I pulled over briefly to check her vitals. Her veins beneath the skin had turned dark, blue and branching like a spider's web. I didn't say anything, but I saw Kruger watching through the rearview mirror of the second truck. He knew, we both did. If she didn't get real medical help soon, we'd lose her. Or worse, she'd turn into something like those things we saw. By mid-afternoon, we reached the Bay Park Square exit. The mall's silhouette loomed against the grey skyline, its familiar commercial facade now dark and half buried in snow. Several vehicles were parked at odd angles across the lot, doors open, snow halfway up the windows. But there were signs of life. Smoke from a chimney vent on the Macy's side, an American flag on the roof, barely moving in the still freezing air. We circled the lot, approaching slowly. Hector spotted the signal tower, a makeshift array of antennas and solar panels lashed together on the JCC Penney roof. We parked in a defensive formation near the loading dock and approached on foot. The cold hit like a hammer once we left the cabs. Even with thermal gear, my joints felt like they were cracking. We knocked on the steel security door and waited. Nothing. Kruger was about to try again when the door opened a sliver. A face peeked through. A man, maybe in his 50s, holding a bolt-action rifle. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared at us, then looked over our shoulders at the trucks. When he saw Lisa, his expression changed. He opened the door the rest of the way. Inside, quick, you brought the cold with you. We entered the back hallway, breath fogging in clouds. The man led us down a dim corridor into the main service concourse, where a handful of propane heaters glowed red against stacks of cots, sleeping bags, and stored food. There were maybe 15 people, adults and a few kids, gathered near the center court, where someone had set up lanterns and solar lights strung from the pillars. The air inside was warmer, barely, and the smell of canned stew hung in the air. Civilization, battered but intact. The man finally introduced himself, Bill Carson, former National Guard, now acting as what passed for head of security. The group had taken over the mall 10 days ago, fortified the entrances, and kept warm using a mix of solar batteries, propane, and wood from dismantled retail kiosks. They'd received the same automated broadcast we had. It came from a repeater node installed by the State Emergency Commission before things went dark. The signal, he said, was on a scheduled loop, maintained by a solar-charged relay that had been running since late summer. It was meant for severe weather refugee coordination. No one had expected it would end up as a lifeline during what the group inside now called the deep freeze. Inside the Bay Park Square Mall, it felt like a tomb converted into a fortress. Most of the shops were looted or empty, their interiors stripped for insulation or kindling. Plastic mannequins lay in piles, shattered and broken apart, their painted-on expressions haunting in the low lantern light. The main concourse had been sealed with barricades built from storefront grates, flipped kiosks, and sheet metal bolted into makeshift walls. Snow had found its way through cracked skylights in the food court, dusting the tile in frozen glitter. The survivors had organized themselves with military efficiency. Bill clearly had leadership experience, and the rest deferred to him without question. There was a chain of command, and it showed. We were led to a storage area behind the old Sears where the group's supplies were kept. MREs, bottled water, old Red Cross blankets, even some propane tanks they'd scavenged from nearby homes. There were sleeping cots lined against the wall, and near the back, a heater hooked to a converted exhaust pipe punched through a broken loading bay door. It wasn't warm, not by any stretch, but it wasn't death either. Bill filled us in that night. Green Bay had gone silent on the second day of the freeze. According to a courier who arrived 2 nights earlier, the city's power grid collapsed after a substation explosion on the west side triggered cascading failures. The hospitals, those that hadn't lost heat, were overrun, not just by the infected, but by cold refugees desperate for shelter. Some brought the sickness in with them. The hospitals became containment zones. No one made it out. Whatever this outbreak was, it wasn't airborne. That was the only good news. Transmission seemed tied to blood contact, scratches, bites. The bad news was, once someone turned, they didn't stop until their bodies literally froze solid. Even then, they might thaw out and move again if exposed to enough warmth. Some had tried incineration, but that came with its own risks. Ventilation, smoke inhalation, and the ever-present danger of burning your only heat source. Claire, the nurse, said the virus, or whatever it was, didn't behave like anything she'd studied. It wasn't viral in the conventional sense. It didn't spread like the flu or rabies. It seemed to hibernate dormant inside the host until the right conditions triggered a change. The cold accelerated it. We laid Lisa on one of their medical cots and secured her wrists and ankles, just in case. Her breathing had grown erratic and her limbs had stiffened, muscles twitching beneath the skin like something was rearranging itself. Claire administered a sedative, ketamine, salvaged from a veterinary clinic nearby, just to keep her still. I couldn't bring myself to look at her too long. Not the way her skin had turned a marbled blue-grey, or the way her veins pulsed faintly under the surface like ice cracking beneath a frozen lake. We'd seen what came next. We all had. Kruger took it the hardest. He'd been silent since we'd crossed into Wisconsin, speaking only in clipped sentences or hand signals. Now he sat near the cot, a faded MDOT patch still sewn onto his coat, staring into the flickering flame of a battery lantern. He hadn't said it out loud, but I knew what was going through his head. He'd kept us alive this long, had watched Lisa hold it together through the worst storm in state history, and now he was about to lose her in the only place we'd found shelter, the last safe room in a world full of cold monsters. By the second night, the snow started again. Not just snow is fall. Tiny daggers of frozen water dropped from the sky, sharp enough to scratch exposed skin, heavy enough to damage the skylights above us. The wind howled like a freight train, and the temperature dropped to -72. Inside, we huddled around heaters, rationing fuel and light, afraid to sleep for too long. Bill doubled the night watches and posted Hector and Jamie at the upper level, near the old movie theatre, to guard the loading bay doors. I volunteered to help, partly because I couldn't sleep either, and partly because I'd been feeling something shift inside me, something beyond exhaustion. That shift came to a head on the 5th day. At 3:14 a.m., the upper security window cracked. Jamie radioed down. Movement on the south side. Multiple figures. We scrambled fast. I grabbed my rifle and took the upper level stairs 2 at a time. The moment I stepped into the corridor leading to the old theatre, I heard it. The low scrape of something dragging against concrete. Not fast, not erratic, just slow, deliberate. Hector was already there, rifle raised, watching the emergency exit door rattle in its frame. "Pressure's building outside," he whispered. "They're pressing in." There was no banging, no screaming, just the sound of weight, a dozen bodies, maybe more, leaning against the door, their breath fogging through the seams. We couldn't open fire. The noise would draw more, and the cold, even through the doorframe, it crept in like poison. Frost bloomed across the handle. Metal groaned under pressure. Then it stopped. I don't know why. Maybe they sensed something we didn't. Maybe they lost interest. Or maybe they were waiting, like predators testing the perimeter of a campfire. We kept our weapons raised for nearly 20 minutes before the pressure eased and the sound of footsteps crunched away into the snow. Jamie came up behind us, face pale. "Camera feed's gone. Power flickered. Mole's backup bank's running low." I radioed Bill. He told us to stay sharp and prepare for a possible breach. Then came the scream. Not from outside, from inside, near the medical station. Kruger's voice broke over the radio, panicked and distorted. "Lisa's awake. She's awake and..." She bit Claire. Hector and I bolted back down the concourse. The cold from outside was bad, but it was nothing compared to the pit I felt open in my stomach as I rounded the corner to the makeshift infirmary and saw the chaos unfolding. One of the cots had been overturned. Blood sprayed across the wall in a sharp arc. Lisa was on the floor twitching violently, her wrists still strapped to the restraints, but the cot frame had been ripped apart. Claire was on her side, bleeding from the forearm, her eyes wide with shock. Kruger had a pistol drawn, shaking so badly he could barely keep it aimed. Don't make me do it," he whispered, tears in his eyes. But Lisa wasn't Lisa anymore. She hissed, almost like steam escaping from frozen pipes, and her body jerked upward in impossible angles. Her fingers cracked like brittle sticks as the tendons snapped and reformed, pulling her toward Kruger on all fours. I raised my rifle, but I was too slow. Kruger fired. One shot. Lisa dropped, her body folding in on itself, a final breath escaping in a plume of white mist. The entire room went quiet, except for Claire's labored breathing and Kruger's quiet sobs. No one spoke for a long time. Bill entered, rifle slung over his back, his face grim. "We burned the body, immediately." We did, that night in a barrel just outside the south exit, with every door sealed and the snow kept clear by hand. The fire burned low and blue, and the smoke was nearly invisible in the frozen air. No one watched. No one said goodbye. On the 6th day, the mall lost power completely. The last of the solar reserve was drained, and the backup diesel generator froze solid. We rationed lanterns to 4 hours per night and shut off all non-essential systems. Food was low. Water had to be melted snow now, filtered and boiled in small batches. It was then that Bill made the call. We had to leave. Not in the trucks. They'd be dead weight in this terrain, but on foot, with what sleds we could build from the remaining supply carts and wooden panels. Word had come via a shortwave burst from Appleton. A cold zone facility at the university had heat, power, and military presence. They were calling it Zone Blue. We didn't know if it was real, but it was our only lead. We packed everything in silence, dressed in every thermal layer we could find, and prepared to march east. Before we left, I returned to the storage lot behind the mall. Snow had buried most of the trucks. My plow, once a lifeline, was now an ice-covered relic, its cabin sealed shut by frost and silence. I touched the doorframe one last time. "We made it this far," I whispered. "Let's see what's left." And then we left the mall behind, stepping into the white silence of the new world. It wasn't the end of the road, but it felt like the beginning of something far worse. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.